Good morning, everybody. This question, how significant was the contribution of Ebert to the development of a democratic German state in the years 1918 to 1919? This was a question that was set as part of your Year 13 mock paper. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I'm just going to take you through some of the key points that the examiners were looking for. It was actually set in 2019. It's from the 2019 paper. So this feedback is going to primarily use the information provided by the examination board. I'll expand on it a little bit. First of all, you've got the indicative content in the back of the mark scheme. We'll use this one first of all. Remember, the indicative content is much better than the mark scheme itself. The mark scheme is very generic. It applies to every question, but you go further back in the mark scheme towards the back and you've got examples that indicate the type of material that could be credited. But it's always a great pain to emphasise that other relevant material must be credited. This is not a mark scheme. It is examples of the type of material. And obviously, because the question is how significant, then clearly it needs to be a balanced argument. You need to look at the factors that support the view that Ebert's contribution towards the development of a democratic state was significant, and then you've got to look at the counter-argument, okay, the opposite point of view. So again, it comes back to the question analysis, the distinguishing between the topic and the proposition. So the topic is about the development of a democratic German state in the years 1918 to 1919, the development of so that's the topic. Okay, that's the main thing that the question's about. So although it's not explicit because this is only indicative content, the best place to really address what the topic is about is in your introduction. Okay, or certainly the first main paragraph of the essay question. So the topic is the creation of a democracy in Germany in 1918 to 1919. So demonstrate that sort of knowledge that a National Assembly was called for January 1919, and on the basis of the election result for the National Assembly, Ebert was the first president of the Republic, and he basically used that position to respond to the composition of the National Assembly, which was dominated by political parties that supported democracy, to ensure that the new Germany after World War I would be a democracy. And of course that was eventually framed in the constitution that was drawn up by Hugo Preuss in August 1919. So clearly that's what the topic is. But you've then got to distinguish between the topic and the proposition, and the proposition is that the main cause of that was the contribution of Ebert. Okay, and so hopefully you'd immediately latch onto the fact that it is presenting to you the role of personality, the impact of one person on history. Okay, and the proposition is that without Ebert there wouldn't have been a democratic German state. Okay, well, clearly you've got to be able to engage with that argument, present the evidence that his personality was important, but also you've got to look at the counter-argument that personality wasn't important and that there were other factors. Okay, and again, hopefully with your knowledge you'd immediately engage with that and you'd think, right, well, what were the other factors? Were there other individuals that were as important as Ebert, possibly Hugo Preuss, possibly Prince Max von Baden, who'd done some work in 1918 with the October Reform, preparing the way? Or were there impersonal forces, in other words, forces at the grassroots level. Remember, history is not always determined by the actions of individuals who are at the top of the decision-making pyramid, the monarchs and the rulers of countries, but history is often dictated by or determined by the ordinary people, the pressure at the grassroots level that we speak about. So you could look at that as an alternative argument. Okay, so what I've just done there is I've just done question analysis for you. Okay, which of course is the most important thing before you launch into any essay. Think through the big picture. Think through the building blocks. Okay, topic, proposition, pressure from above, pressure from below. What are the sort of key issues that should inform your planning? Okay. So, looking at the mark scheme, the arguments that support the view that Ebert made a significant contribution. Let's just zoom in a little bit. Let's just have a look. It says they should be analysed and evaluated. Okay. So, clearly, just to use the words that are here is not going to be an analysis and evaluation. You've got to discuss these points, okay? Bring in your own knowledge, but certainly the essence is here to give you an idea of what we were looking for. So, supporting view. Ebert played a key role in the establishment of the German Republic and took responsibility as its first president, okay? So, a analysis there would be necessary about how Ebert, in a sense, took very seriously the fact that right from the very beginning he was very, very consistent, wasn't he, in terms of the saying it must be for the people to decide, okay, and he always took very seriously the National Assembly, the Constituent Assembly. The elections were called for the middle of January 1919, and his own personal inclinations, in a sense, he actually wanted to bring back the monarchy. Remember that on the 9th of November 1918, how frustrated he was when Scheidemann declared that the new Germany was a republic. Ebert's personal inclinations were actually, he wanted to keep the Kaiser, he wanted Germany to become a constitutional monarchy. So that was important to him. But as frustrated as he was with that, once that Scheidemann had made that announcement, Ebert stuck to his guns. He was the leader of the caretaker government, and he basically said that the National Assembly must decide and make that decision. And once appointed as president by the National Assembly, Ebert took very, very seriously. He gave the task of drawing up a constitution to a constitutional commission led by Hugo Preuss, and it took until August 1919 before the Weimar Constitution was drawn up. And obviously the Weimar Constitution was in a sense a model of democracy. It was very groundbreaking by the standards of his day. Okay, women were given the vote, etc., etc. So I think that those are the sorts of key points I'd be looking for there. And likewise there, Ebert played a key role in supporting the Constitution. Hugo Preuss wrote the Constitution, but Ebert made sure that a commission led by Hugo Preuss, who was a lawyer, a liberal lawyer, played that key role in writing the Constitution, and that it shouldn't be interfered with by politicians such as himself. Okay, so those are all sort of relevant points that about Ebert's contribution, supporting the view that his contribution was important. Next one, Ebert confronted the violent and radical challenges that threatened revolution in Germany by the pact with Gruner. So obviously the violent and radical challenges are from the extreme left, the Spartacist movements. So that's clearly a key component in arguing that Ebert was important, because the radical left wanted to give power to the workers' Soviets. And arguably, remember, you're only looking at one argument here, but the argument, of course, is that that's not democracy, because that is denying the middle classes a vote. So Ebert was determined to ensure that the radical left wing that were pushing for workers' Soviets and what wanted to use violence to determine the future of Germany should not have their say. And so Ebert effectively sided with General Groener and used the Freikorps to crush the Spartacist threat in order to ensure that democracy could take root in Germany. Okay, so that's obviously a massive area. The pact with Groener, and the date was the 10th of November. That shows you the sense of priority. It was very early on. The day after the abdication of the Kaiser, and the day before the final instrument of surrender at the end of World War One. Another area, Ebert brokered an agreement between the unions and the employers, the industrialists, which brought about industrial stability. Democracy in the workplace, in other words. So what we're talking about there is the Stinners-Legian Agreement of November 1918, which was effectively, as say, the ensuring that radical solutions were not implemented in the workplace, which of course is what the Soviets wanted. The Soviets wanted effectively to create a classless society and to take power away from the bosses in the workplace and have factories run by workers' committees. Ebert was having none of that. He was saying, if we're going to have a true democratic state, according to the principles of democracy, we can't deny the rights of the bosses. And so he ensured through the Stinners-Legian Agreement that a framework was established so that the unions and the industrialists would be able to work in harmony together. And that was an important principle that strengthened the Weimar Republic. We can actually see that with hindsight. Okay, so yes, 4 useful bullet points. They do need to be explained, they do need to be analysed and evaluated, but 4 useful bullet points there which support the view that Ebert made a significant contribution. So he had a key role in establishing the German Republic. He played a key role in supporting the writing of the Constitution, and he took on the radical left, and he ensured that an agreement was made between the unions and the industrialists. Okay, so that's a argument in support of the proposition. An argument countering the proposition also needs to be analysed and evaluated. Okay, so given 5 bullet points here as examples. There could be more. Let's have a look at them. So Ebert failed to reform the military leadership, and power remained with the Prussian elite. Well, clearly, yes, that's linking in with the earlier point about it's the sort of spin-off of the Ebert-Groener Pact. That part of that pact, in which Ebert approached Groener to say, I need your support, the army's support to crush the radical left. The payback was that the conservative right were allowed to retain influence in the new democracy, okay, inside the new Weimar Republic. So again, you know so much about that, about what exactly does that mean. In terms of power, it basically meant that they kept the key positions within the civil service, obviously the upper levels of the German army, but also the judiciary, the legal system, and also to a large extent in the education system, particularly the higher education system of the Weimar Republic was dominated by the old families of the Second Reich, in particular Prussian Junker families held a significant amount of influence. Now that in itself developed that point. I think it's useful, although the question is about 1918 to 1919. Jump forward 10 years to 1929 to 30, because all of this effectively became relevant. Because the point you're making here is that democracy arguably was fatally undermined by Ebert's decision to side with Groener. And although that was not really apparent at the time in 1919, 10 years later, and I know Ebert had died by then, because Ebert died in 1925, 10 years later, by 1930, 2930, the chickens had come home to roost in a sense, because with the onset of the Great Depression and the mass unemployment that resulted from America withdrawing money, basically democracy collapsed very quickly. It actually collapsed in 1930, and it reverted to lawmaking by Article 48, Chancellor Brüning governing Germany using Article 48. And arguably, the reason that happened is that the conservative establishment, whose job it was to ensure that democracy worked, did not have a will to make democracy work. At heart, they despised democracy. And so the forces around the president very quickly reverted back to old habits. Let's govern Germany in an authoritarian way. So the fact that the Weimar Republic's establishment, whose job it was to ensure that democracy worked, the fact that they were dominated by old families who did not believe in democracy, fundamentally weakened it. And arguably, that was Ebert's fault, okay, is the point that we're making there. You could develop that further then by talking about the fact that Ebert relied on the Freikorps to suppress the risings. The roving units of soldiers who basically were allowed to keep their weapons on returning from the trenches in 1918 to 1919. And what he then did, by relying on the Freikorps, he established a dangerous precedent, because he, in a sense, had turned to the radical right wing to restore order. And time and again, in the Weimar Republic, these radical right-wing forces were enabled to flourish, to grow, and to have undue influence. And groups like the Nazi movement, obviously, is the example. The Stahlhelm, the steel helmets, the sort of paramilitary groups that sustained a huge influence over the 14 years of the Weimar Republic. The stab in the back myth, the popularization of these far right ideas about the value of the World War I soldier, etc., etc. Well, that came out of the fact that Ebert relied on the Freikorps at the beginning of 1919. So again, it is only an argument, it's only one point of view, but nevertheless it's an important one, is that he set a precedent there. Ebert was prepared to compromise his socialist principles and was regarded by many on the left as a class traitor, which led to divisions amongst politicians who favoured democracy. Now again, I think this is a huge one, which certainly warrants a full paragraph in itself to develop that particular point. I've just linked that again to 1929 to 30. In other words, 10 years later, the sort of background that led to the Nazis breaking into the political scene in the elections of 1930, and ultimately, of course, Hitler took power in January 1933, that arguably one of the reasons that the Nazis and Hitler were able to do that was that the political left wing was fatally divided between the radical left, the communists, and the moderate left, the social democrats. And that if they had worked together, if the communists and the social democrats had pulled together as a single united party and had worked as a united socialist front, then the rise to power of Hitler would have been blocked, and Hitler would never have taken power in January 1933. Now, this is only a point of view, but nevertheless, it is a strong and persuasive point of view, that because the political left was divided into two parties, Hitler was able to constantly drive a wedge in the middle of the socialist left. So the relevance here, of course, is that Ebert was more intent on stopping the communists taking power, okay, and siding with the political right against the radical left in 1918 to 1919. And so the radical left, people such as Luxemburg and Liebknecht, the revolutionary shop stewards, the left wing of the USPD as well, always regarded Ebert as not really a true socialist. So he was he was betraying his socialist roots. He was betraying his Marxist roots, and was too willing to side with the conservative right. And so he undermined socialist principles. So just remember the far left likewise would say that they believed in democracy as well. I mean, the Marxist movement were called the Social Democrats, but he was so prepared to compromise that he was regarded as a class traitor. Okay, so that's an important point. And I say, I think to make reference, certainly when I was marking these essays, I thought surely there needs to be a flash forward to what happened 10 years later to kind of make sense of that point. Okay, so sometimes in an A-level essay, yes, you're given the dates 1918 to 1919, but if it's justified, you can use material from either a lot earlier or a lot later to help explain the significance of what you're talking about. Okay, and I think I was looking for that there. Ebert, next one. Ebert was linked in the minds of many with the acceptance of the Versailles settlement. Okay, so again, I think that's obviously ties in to the earlier points about the Freikorps, etc., etc. That remember at the beginning of 1919, with the election of the National Assembly, the political parties that favoured democracy, and the Social Democrats were the largest of those in the National Assembly, collectively, I think, had 76% of the seats. Okay, so there was an overwhelming support for democracy within the First National Assembly. 3/4 of German voters had sent a clear message: we want the future Germany to be a democratic state. Okay, and Ebert acted on that principle. Okay, but then in June 1919, okay, just 5 months later, Ebert had that bitter pill to swallow. He had to sign or send delegates over to Paris to sign the Treaty of Versailles. And what was seen by the German people as a shameful treaty forever linked Ebert in the minds of the German people with a shameful treaty. And from that point on, that 76% solid base that the pro-democratic parties had inside the Reichstag shrank, and there was polarization, and many voters from that point onwards went more to the extreme left or the extreme right. And so that's a relevant point, because Ebert was associated, he became the scapegoat. The radical right always then blamed Ebert for that. And so the political party that Ebert led, the principle of democracy that this party stood for, was undermined and weakened as a result of the signing of the Treaty of Versailles. And so that association that Ebert had with the Treaty of Versailles was important. And the last point there, it was a constitutional commission that produced the draft constitution. So there's just a sort of counter argument to the earlier point. That the earlier point, of course, was that Ebert supported the writing of a democratic constitution. That was Ebert's contribution. But if you want to actually get into the nitty-gritty details of the constitution itself and the emphasis on basic civil liberties which are written into the constitution, the rights of women to have a vote, they were all written by the commission, and the commission was led by a liberal called Hugo Preuss. So you've got to give credit where credit is due to Hugo Preuss and the lawyers who drafted this very, very forward-thinking constitution, which by the standards of its time was very democratic. Remember, it was more democratic than Britain. I mean, women didn't get the vote in Britain until 1928. There were other forces, there were other personalities that played a part in the drafting of the Weimar Constitution. And remember, the Weimar Constitution wasn't eventually published until the summer of 1919. So a good 9 months after the end of World War I. It took a long time to draft and eventually have it published. Okay, so there's lots there for 45 minutes to talk about and to bring in to play. Clearly, as you can see, there needs to be a sense of argument and counter-argument, a debate. There has to be that debate within the essay, and so that so the structure of your argument, the building blocks, needs to allow that interplay of for and against to happen in your essay. So yes, many candidates would have the first half of the essay would look at the arguments for, and the second half of the essay would look at the arguments against. Valid approach. Now the second thing to look at then is the Chief Examiner's report. Okay, and the section at the beginning of the Chief Examiner's report says this was the least popular of the Section B questions in this option in 2019. The majority of candidates who answered it, though, showed a sound knowledge of Ebert's policies and actions, e.g. his role in framing the Constitution and his deal with Gruner to counter the threat of extremism. Many of the stronger responses brought out the debate about Ebert actually betrayed democracy in the methods he was prepared to employ against what he regarded as threats from the left. In other words, siding with Gruner, siding with the using the Freikorps. The stronger candidates mentioned the work of Ebert against other factors, okay, e.g. the roles of Prince Max of Baden, okay. I mentioned that briefly a few minutes ago. So remember, the October Reform Movement, Prince Max von Baden, this is before the war had ended, had drafted proposals for change that would have brought in a much greater element of democracy, abandoning the three-tier voting system in Prussia, etc., etc. So again, that's giving credit to Prince Max. I know he didn't last very long, but he was a liberal chancellor before Ebert. And other factors such as the role of Ludendorff. I mean, Ludendorff, obviously, the stab in the back, which I referred to earlier. And the examiner's report said some substantial and balanced debates ensued. And so what they've given to you in the examiner's report is they've scanned an answer, which you can read. I won't read it to you. And that answer, get a sense of the length of it there. That answer was awarded a level 5. So the examiner points out it's a focused response. It identifies, illustrates, and explains a range of factors. It weighs up their relative significance. So it's constantly looking at the strengths and weaknesses of the argument. The stated factor is addressed, i.e. the role of Ebert. Specific evidence is identified and examples are given, e.g. Ebert's formal political role and his policies towards what were regarded as extremist challenges. The answer is well structured, paragraphs, it's clearly worked in building blocks and clearly expressed, so that the quality of communication is strong, which is why it merits a level 5 award. And level 5, broadly speaking, is either a secure A star or certainly the top end of a grade A. So read that answer and you'll hopefully get a sense of its strengths and its qualities that are listed by the examiner at the end there. Okay, that's it from me. I'll stop there. I've got one more question which I'm going to go through. I'll do another video on that, which is from the mock exam, and that's the section A, which is the Bismarck and the development of Bismarck and the growth of democracy in Germany in 1871. The other question you did in the mock, the section C question, I've already gone through in the previous lesson. Hopefully you're all well and safe. Thank you. Bye.